It's Mo. It is July 8th, actually, and I finished 2 books in July, but I haven't yet talked about them. It is time to do a monthly vlog-style reading wrap-up where I wrap up the books. I talk for about 5 minutes about each book that I've read in the month, and I try to talk about them as soon as I've read them as possible. Now, that doesn't always happen, and this month is a good example. So, although technically I've read 2 books, one of them was a picture book, and I don't include picture books in my wrap-up generally. So if you would like to see a wrap-up of all the picture books that I've been reading, just let me know in the comments below. But the first novel that I read is The Subtweet by Vivek Shaya. This is a short novel about 2 musicians and how they became friends and where that friendship ended up. I didn't know much more than that. I might have even known less than that going into this, but I wanted to read this book. I started it in the very end of June because it is a book written by a trans author and because I love the cover. It's so beautiful. And I really didn't know what it was about. Vivek Shaya also has a nonfiction book called Why I'm Afraid of Men, or I'm Afraid of Men, which is really interesting and has been on my want to read list. I saw The Subtweet on audio. I really liked this audiobook. It was read by one narrator. It's from the perspective of 2 or 3 different women, and it's a book all about female friendship, woman friendship. So it's definitely about how you make friends and how you lose friends and how friends can thrive and be inspired by each other, or how one friend can drag a friend group down. It's about negative and positive interactions with people, and negative and positive female interaction, and how women can tend to be either very, very close and open and understanding of each other, or very closed off and protective and jealous of each other. So it was an interesting look at that. I don't know if I've ever read a book that was so much, almost only about a friendship between 2 women, because not really much else happens in this book except exploring these women's feelings about each other and their interactions with each other. I really enjoyed that, and this book read to me very much like a new adult book, almost verging on young adult, but these characters are older. I liked the look at creativity and musicianship and how you don't need formal training to be a musician, and how making music or making art is just something that if you want to do it, you should just do it and continue to do it, and that's how you get better at it. So I think that was a very interesting look too, because a lot of these characters start off in college or university and then kind of have to find their way into the art scene and find their creativity and find their inspiration to be artists and to be musicians. I liked that this book had very few male characters and very few interactions of any variety except between all these different women. It follows 2 women primarily, but there are other women who are either prior friends of one or the other, or become friends together, or enter into the group in some way. I really appreciated that this book was not a romance in any capacity, but it was romantic and nostalgic in the way that it dealt with feelings of, like, the feelings that everyone feels when they're nervous about a friendship, or when they're excited about a friendship, when they make a new friend, and it's that falling in love feeling, but it's a platonic love for another person. This book felt like every insecurity you've ever had as a teenager or a young adult. It felt like making new friends, and it felt like your saddest breakup. When I read some more in the month of July, I will let you know. It is so hot. I'm so hot and sticky. Ugh, it's very hot. It is July 14th, and I have finished 3 more books in July. I definitely have been going slowly, and I definitely was right in the end of my June wrap up to say that I was feeling a little slumpy, but I'm kind of on a good roll now, so I hope I can keep it up for the end of July. The third book that I finished in July was The Red Lamp by Mary Roberts Rinehart. This is my first Mary Roberts Rinehart, and she is considered an American Agatha Christie, and Kevy loves her, and I was really happy to find this earlier this year at one of my favorite used bookstores. I found this one and another one by her, and this was the perfect time to pick it up. This is exactly what I needed right now. I love mysteries, I love cozy mysteries, I love golden age mysteries, and this was very much a cozy golden age mystery. This book follows William Porter, who is a teacher at a college. He loves his wife and he has a young niece or charge, and she is in love with a young man who also works at Porter's college. Porter is not well off, he's not well to do, but he does have an uncle that has quite a bit of money and a large estate. When that uncle passes away, he is left the estate, and the first time that William and his family are going to go there are the summer holidays from college. His uncle was a little bit eccentric, and there's some strange tales about the house, and his wife, who has some uncanny abilities to recognize darkness, is a little bit trepidatious to go to this summer house. So instead of staying in the big house, they stay in the lodge, which is like a guest quarters. As soon as they get there, some strange things start happening. There are some paranormal seeming activities surrounding the house and the town, and this house was recognized by spiritualists, so there is rumors that spirits live in the house. This story follows Porter and his family and his charge's love interest as they try to investigate what is actually happening and try to figure out if they can keep this large estate even if it's haunted. So I really loved this book. It was told all in diary form until the very end. It's like an epistolary novel. It's all of William's diary, and it's very much a golden age mystery. It's quite long, like 350 pages, and a little bit slow. There's no really gruesome aspects. It's not that it's not scary. It's a little bit scary, but it's not gory by any means. It very much has to do with like spiritualism and spiritualists and the idea of the afterlife and ghosts. I find that a lot of Golden Age mysteries touch on that. This one actually reminded me quite a bit of Through a Glass Darkly by Helen McCloy, which I read a few years ago and I loved, and I can't find any more of Helen McCloy's books, but I thought it was so good in that it has this spiritualist element, and around the time in the 1930s when this was written, that was very, very popular, but you're not really sure if there's actual paranormal activity going on, so you have to read the book to find out. There's some slow aspects of this, there's a lot of description, but Porter and his family were really interesting characters, and I liked how they went about solving the mystery and who solved the mystery, and I kind of guessed it, but it could have gone a couple of different ways, so I was like not quite sure. And some of the things were definitely a little bit convenient, but it was still such a super enjoyable read that I really liked this one. The next book that I finished in July is The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. I read this on audio. I found it on one of my free audio sites, and it was read by multiple different people. Now, unlike with There, which I read on audio and also had multiple perspectives and multiple actors voicing the different characters, I didn't like this one as much, and it didn't work for me as well. I think that although the characters all had very distinct voices, it just wasn't as interesting or compelling, and so I don't know, I didn't love all the different people that were involved. But this book follows several different people, friends from college. They all went to Oxford together, and they are getting together as they do every year for New Year's Eve. The most recent friend to the group, Emma, has done all the preparation for this particular festivities, and she's really excited about it, but she's still a little bit outside the main group. Yes, she is the girlfriend of one of the core people, but she is not totally accepted by everyone. But Emma's decided that they are staying at an extremely remote hunting lodge in the Scottish wilderness, a place where if they get snowed in, they might be stuck for quite a while. This book takes place in multiple timelines as well, so it's told by Emma and the friend group in the past. It's told by the gamekeeper Doug and the lodge keeper Heather in the present storyline. And in the present storyline, they've discovered a body. This book is a very typical isolated closed circle mystery where these 9 guests and a couple of other guests who also are around are trapped in the lodge because of course there is a big snowstorm. You know right away that someone has died, but it takes you almost the entire book to find out who's died and why they were killed and who killed them. It was fine. It was very quick and fun and easy, and I was glad to have read a Lucy Foley because some people really, really like her work. She is well known for The Guest List, which is an extremely similar book in that it is a closed circle mystery, but that one takes place during the summer at a wedding. So this one was fine. There was definitely some animal violence because they are on a hunting lodge, hence the hunting party, and there were some like gross moments, but like overall it wasn't super gory or even super violent. The moments that were more thrilling were more like feeling trapped, not knowing who your friends were, those kind of thrilling elements rather than like actual gore, horror, or scary sections. I don't think that I'll be reading any more Lucy Foley. It wasn't really like that exciting or interesting to me, and I didn't love the multiple cast of the audiobook. I don't think if I had read it physically I would have liked it either because I don't tend to like multiple perspective books. So it was fine. Glad to have read it. Glad to cross it off my list. It's not a book that's going to stick with me, and it's not a author that I'll be seeking out. And the 5th book that I finished in July was much more of a hit. That was Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. This book was on my 2021 summer TBR, and it was also in my 2022 summer TBR, and it's one that I've been wanting to get to for a long time. I heard about this really early on booktube, and it sounded really, really interesting, and then I found this Book of the Month copy in a free little library, I think near Keyport, New Jersey. This book follows Lillian, who is kind of at a dead end in her life. She was kicked out of a prestigious boarding school for reasons that you discover later. And after that, although she finished high school and then attempted college, she never went anywhere with her life. She ended up being a cashier at a grocery store, and she always just kind of bummed around and did nothing. When her best friend from that boarding school, a girl who she was completely enamored with, ends up contacting her much later in life after she is an adult and asks her to come to her huge estate for a mysterious job, Lillian feels compelled to go. Madison and Lillian never lost contact. They write each other several times a year, and they still consider each other friends even though their time at boarding school was very brief. Lillian gets to Madison's estate to realize that Madison is married to a senator, extremely rich, and has a very strange job for Lillian to take on. Madison's husband's children, who he's estranged from, are coming back into the family after their mother died, and they have a very unique problem. They spontaneously combust. So Lillian decides to take on this job, partly to be close to Madison again, and this book is everything that happens to them after that decision is made. I really liked this book. I'm glad that it met my expectations as far as I really enjoyed it, and I was hoping I would really enjoy it, and I did really enjoy it. I think that Lillian is an interesting character because she's filled with a lot of self-doubt and self-loathing, and she's filled with a lot of directionless apathy. But she also knows that she's extremely smart and skilled, and she knows that she can solve problems. She understands the relationship that she had with Madison. She understands the strained relationship that she has with her mother, and she goes into new relationships with that knowledge and that self-awareness. So she continues to be self-aware in her new relationships, and especially with these 2 children who catch on fire unexpectedly. I liked that there was no explanation or deep investigation of the reasons behind or the science behind why this was happening, but it was kind of just this speculative element that because everyone in the book accepted it, you accept it as well. And I liked that Lillian and Madison and everyone that Lillian came in contact with had a interesting and complex relationship, but Lillian was extremely relatable. She's not necessarily a likable character. I don't think everyone will super enjoy her, but I certainly did. I also really liked the kids, and I liked that she was trepidatious about working with children because she doesn't spend a lot of time with children, but these 10, 11-year-old children, she kind of treats them as much like adults as she can without damaging them. And I think that's a good way to go about talking to children, not like they're idiots, but like they are people just like you and me. I personally am not a fan of children. I don't like children that much, so I was worried about reading a book that had a lot to do with children, but I really enjoyed this one. I thought that every character was maybe not fully formed entirely, but interesting, and that their relationships I thought made a lot of sense. I was worried about Kevin Wilson writing from a female perspective, but I actually felt quite akin with Lillian and with the kids in some ways, and so I enjoyed his writing a female perspective. I literally just finished this book this morning, so I feel like I'm going to have more thoughts on it at some point, although I don't think that this is a particularly deep or nuanced book. I think this is kind of a straightforward story, although it is a speculative story. I mean, there are definitely conversations to be had here, especially about relationships and parental relationships and found family as opposed to genetic family or biological family, but overall I didn't feel like any deep questions or comments that I needed to make about this. And when I read some more, I'll let you know. It is July 20th, and I finished another book in July. I finished The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell. I got this one earlier this year on my birthday shopping trip. I will leave a link to that video down below, and I had been wanting to read this. This was one of the first books that I found out about on booktube that I was really interested in. This is a historical fiction mystery thriller about Elsie, who has recently married, but unfortunately has also recently lost her new husband, and she is going to his family home where his family has not lived for many years, but he wanted them to live there together. So now that she is pregnant and widowed, she is going to live in the Bridge, the family estate. She's there with her late husband's cousin. She's not really excited to be there. She's grieving, but she's not showing a lot of signs of grief, and so people are a little bit confused about that. She's kind of being hidden away. The house is not up to her standards, even though she comes from a very humble background. She had wanted to live the life of a fancy lady, and the house is kind of falling apart. Her husband had gone there previously to fix it up before she arrived, but there's rooms that are closed off, things that are moldy, there's sawdust and dust all over the house, and there's a locked attic room that she can't get into. When one day the locked attic room door is mysteriously open, it starts a long sequence of events that is definitely not what Elsie expected. This is a horror, thriller, mystery with definite supernatural, paranormal aspects. And overall, I liked it. I don't think it did anything completely amazing or new or inventive, but I liked Elsie, and I liked Elsie's relationship with her cousin-in-law, and I liked the descriptions of the house, and it definitely was very creepy. Although the creep factors are not new or inventive, they were done in a way that made you feel creeped out, which is kind of the point. And I didn't realize, but I was reading this during Summerween, and I didn't really take much notice of that readathon, but I definitely plan to do more for it next year. So maybe more this month if I have time, or next time they do like a summer weekend, a weekend ween, or whatever they call it, all the different things, or if they do a Halloween one, I don't even know. The thing that I didn't love about this was that it's definitely like purple prose, it's definitely like overly flowery language, and it had that historical fiction aspect that I found in Maisie Dobbs, which I read earlier this year, which was that like there is historic language used, but it doesn't feel genuine. A portion of this book that's set in the late 1800s, and then there's a portion of this book that's set in the late 1600s. Both of them have language that's used that makes me feel like the author just watched some movies or shows or read some books that were set in that time period and then like emulated what she thought of as the language that was being used, but maybe didn't do any actual research into how people actually spoke. There's also not a present day in our time, but a present day for the characters that happens after the main events of the book. So there's 3 timelines. 2 are set in the 1800s and 1 is set in the 1600s, and it was just way too many timelines for me. I'm just not into the dual timeline, multiple perspective kind of thing that much, and this one just was... I didn't love it. Like, I don't think we needed the earlier timeline at all, especially because there's a diary aspect to this book. I think that those events could have been told to us through that diary, and that would have made it a little bit more interesting and compelling, and like the characters finding out about the shocking events that happened in the 1600s instead of us finding out about them and then the characters finding out about them would have been more compelling, more interesting. Overall, I did like this book. I don't think I'll be seeking out any more Laura Purcell necessarily. It was a very unusual book for me to read. I don't usually read historical fiction. I definitely don't usually read historical fiction that's set in like the 1600s. I don't usually read about like women and pregnant women. So it was definitely an interesting read, and I'm glad to have read it and crossed off my list. And it fit perfectly for Summerween because it was creepy and thrilling and compelling enough that it fit those like Halloween vibes. And that was the 6th book that I read in July. It is July 22nd, and I have read another book in July. I finished All Systems Red by Martha Wells. I read this in one day, all yesterday. It's super quick to read. It's under 150 pages, and it is a time in the distant future when different civilizations have colonized planets and solar systems, but are looking for other planets to potentially move to or take resources from. And the main character in this book is a sentient android AI with human components. So they have a human face and they have human parts, but they are able to easily tap into systems and computers, and they're designed to be persona-less security robots. Now, this particular robot that we're following has hacked their governing chip and is able to have their own thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and the thing that they mostly want to do is watch TV. This android calls itself Murderbot. They don't call themselves that to other humans and the humans that they're helping. It is their job to help humans survey this new world, to protect them, and to be security for the habitat that they have created while they're surveying this planet. Even though Murderbot has hacked their own system, they still are happy to do their job, make money, go back. It's something to do, as long as they still get to watch their TV shows. When there's unexpected flora and fauna on the planet that they're surveying, Murderbot has to save the humans that they're working with and decide how much they're going to let these humans know about their sentient nature. I've been looking forward to this one for a long time. I got it earlier this year on my birthday book trip, I think, but I've been looking for it for a while because ever since joining BookTube, I've heard so many good things about the Murderbot series. This is a series with like 8 or 9 books in it, I think only 7 of which have actually been written and published so far, but it sounds right up my alley. Sci-fi, futuristic, colonizing worlds, a little bit of a sci-fi western type vibe, very Firefly in what I could tell, and I think it definitely did live up to that, like maybe a cross between like Firefly and Moon. I definitely really enjoyed this one. I don't think I loved it as much as a lot of people love the Murderbot series. Like, I thought I was going to be like, can't wait to read the next one, and I can't wait to read the next one. It didn't have my heart the way that I thought that Murderbot would have my heart. I did really enjoy it. I liked the kind of look at sentience and the idea of freedom, the idea of making your own choices. I think it's interesting that Murderbot could just throw off all their shackles once they've hacked their governing chip, but instead of that, they still do help their human counterparts, and they still do their job, partly so that no one can find out that they've hacked their chip, but also partly just because ultimately, at heart, they are a good sentient being. I like that this was very short and to the point, but it did make you connect and feel for the characters. Because Murderbot is a non-human life form, it is a little bit hard to connect with them and know exactly what their motivations are. They definitely are very straightforward and honest in what they're doing and what they're thinking, but they're quite a cold character, so it is hard to identify with them a little bit, but I didn't mind that. I'm definitely interested to see what they do next. So overall, not as amazing as I had thought it would be, but still a win. And that was the 7th book that I've read in July. It is July 25th, and I finished 2 more books in July. I finished Devolution by Max Brooks. I read this book on audio after Melted Books suggested that the audiobook was really good. I got this physical copy earlier this year at a little free library in a park near my house, and I had heard so many mixed things about it. I had heard that it wasn't very good, so I was kind of hesitant to pick it up and read it, but I was trying to read like cli-fi books for July, just like a vague wish of books that I wanted to read in July, and when I saw Melted Books read this and she really enjoyed it and she suggested the audio, I decided to find the audio and listen to that. This book follows Kate. She has just moved to a eco community near Mount Rainier. That is in the northwest part of the United States. This eco community is supposed to be like all-encompassing, have everything you need. It recycles water and waste. It's very secluded. You don't have to lock your doors. You are living among other like-minded people and also scientists, artists, writers, intellectual and environmentally conscious-minded people. So it seems like an idyllic place. Now, Kate was living in California and she was really hating it. And her brother had lived in this eco-village before, and he ended up having to leave and give up his spot. So he let Kate and her husband live there. From the minute Kate gets there, Kate really loves the environment, the seclusion, the nature. A big part of this eco-village is living so close to nature, and that's really what Kate's been craving. She's been struggling with her relationship, she's been struggling with anxiety, and this seems like a totally wonderful place for her to end up. Until Mount Rainier unexpectedly erupts and all hell breaks loose, not only for Kate and this eco community, but all over the world. This has ramifications, especially for the Northwest, but especially in Kate's remote village. So this story, just like Max Brooks' other book, World War Z, is about what it's about. Obviously, it's about the relationships of the people and how they have to survive after this global catastrophe. But also, it's about society on a larger scale and a micro look of what would happen if there were such natural disasters that knocked out phones and cell service and internet. How people would come together and how people would fight and how people would isolate themselves, or how they would form a more strong community. It just so happens that there are repercussions and ramifications caused by the volcano that are not just affecting humans, but they're affecting the animal life as well. And Kate and her community soon learn that there are large animals that they would have never expected to encounter, that they are going to have to find if they can share the environment with, or if they have to battle to save their own species. Again, this is like a very interesting look on like what would happen for natural disasters, how different communities would react to those things. And some of this we've already seen, like with Katrina and with the Puerto Rican earthquake, like how different communities react, how people are found, how people are saved, how people survive these things. But then added on to there, we have these creatures that Kate and the community are encountering, whether these creatures are a threat, and the different way that different community members see these creatures. A lot of people see them as just another animal that they have to protect and that they moved to this remote location to be close to, and a lot of them see them as the potential threat that they actually are. So I thought it was really interesting. I liked it. I definitely liked the cast. There was a lot of cool people like Judy Greer and Nathan Fillion, like a lot of cool voices in this particular reading. I found it free online. I really enjoyed the different perspectives, but as with all multiple perspective audiobooks that I've read recently, it is sometimes hard to differentiate who was who. And since this book is written almost like a interview style or oral history, when the chapters change and when it's someone who's not Kate talking, then it's sometimes hard to remember who's who and who's talking, and it was hard for me to identify which actor was which person. So like Nathan Fillion plays Kate's brother, but like it took me a long time to figure out that that was who that character was. And it was kind of hard to glean by context. But overall, I really enjoyed this book, and I was happy to have read it. I like Max Brooks. I think he is obviously doing something with genre fiction, with Bigfoot, with zombies. He loves those classic movie tropes, but he really does them in a thoughtful geopolitical way, and he's not just talking about Bigfoot, he is also talking about like society and how society might break down or how they might gather together. And I think that he does it in a way that's accessible and not like banging you over the head with a moral lesson. It's more like take this microcosm and look at it, and then once you start thinking about it, you're like, oh, I could apply that to larger communities, to countries, to society, to the world. I don't think it's overly preachy. I think it's more like done in a tongue-in-cheek way, and that makes it fun. I'm excited to see what Max Brooks comes out with next. We've had zombies, we've had Bigfoot. What is going to be his next trope movie monster that he's going to take on? I'd be super interested to see. It would be fun maybe to do like a Creature of the Black Lagoon, like water one. That would be cool. Even though his books are epistolary novels told in diary entries, told as oral histories, told as interviews, you do connect to the main characters and the situation. So I think in World War Z, I don't remember any of the main characters in that, but I remember there being poignant moments. I remember there being shocking moments. I remember there being scary moments. And definitely I felt the same about Devolution, although I did connect with the main characters in this. You get to know three main characters that you really, really like, and there are sad moments, there are poignant moments, there are proud moments that you find yourself emotional about. I really appreciate that he can do that in a fairly silly genre fiction with actual political undertones. The next book that I read in July was Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi. This is a near future, I would say sort of American Afrofuturistic novel about two siblings, Ella and Kev. Kev was born during the Rodney King riots in LA, and then they move with their mother to Harlem. Ella has some unique abilities and powers. She can tell by touching someone or by looking at them intently what their future might hold. She knows that Kev is also a special child. So when they grow up together in Harlem, she tries to protect him as best she can, but her powers are hard to control, and she ends up having to leave him, and they take very different and divergent paths. Most of the story is about two black siblings and about how they see and navigate the world. This is a book out of time, so time moves very fluidly in the story and in Kev and Ella's lives. And we see them coming together and separating and coming back together. I'd been really wanting to read this book for a long time. I thought it was really interesting. I kind of had no idea what it was going to be about. I heard it was extremely violent and emotionally heavy, but I wasn't really prepared for like what this story actually is. I think it is violent. It is emotionally heavy. It is topical. But I didn't really realize that there was going to be so much of a fantasy sci-fi element, and that we were going to be rooted in today's world, but also we were going to be out of time and in a more science fiction world as well. This book was on my 20 books I found out about in 2020 that I wanted to read in 2021. Unfortunately, I didn't get to it until now. I thought the writing was really interesting. I thought being out of time and dropping you into a story where you're not sure if you are rooted in our reality or a science fiction world, dropping you into a story that is set in the past but simultaneously happening in the current time and simultaneously happening in the future was really well done and very seamless. There were only a few moments where I had to pause and say like, oh, this is what he's doing now. Like, this is what's happening now. I mean, it's extremely short. It's only 175 pages, but I think that the story flowed and you were carried along with it in a very seamless way. I do think that this book was a little bit preachy, maybe is not the right word, but it obviously is from the Black experience and about the Black experience. Seeing Black and brown bodies harmed, imprisoned, incarcerated, overworked, ignored, their health not being treated the way that other members of society's health would, them being exploited and abused by white people is the major theme of this book besides the sibling relationship. It was a little heavy-handed. That's a good phrase for it. It was heavily done. Obviously, it is heavy subject matter, so it kind of makes sense. And not to mention, this is subject matter that not everyone understands is actually happening today. So I get the anger and frustration that you feel from this book. This book was written in 2019, so it is pre-George Floyd and it is pre-pandemic, but it definitely deals with a lot of topics that I've seen post and a lot of what Black authors are thinking about, and I definitely appreciate it for that reason, although I feel like if it had been a longer book, it maybe could have been done a little more subtly. I would say if you liked hell of a book, this is like a shorter, faster, tighter version of that story in some ways. Even though this was a very short book, I appreciated how quickly you felt for the characters, felt both their joy and camaraderie and sibling love, but also felt their anger and fear and the self-control that they were constantly having to utilize to just make it through every day. So I'm super happy to have read this book, and I always say that. Of course I'm happy to have read this book. I like so many books. I like a lot of books. Books are good. This was the 9th book that I read in July, and when I read some more, I'll let you know. It is August 3rd, and at the end of July, I read Final Girls by Riley Sager. This was the 10th book that I read in July, and this was on my summer TBR in 2021 and my summer TBR in 2022, and I'm glad to have finally read it. This was my first Riley Sager. This is one of his earlier works, and one of his least liked works. This follows Quincy, who is now in her late 20s, but about 10 years ago, she was the last survivor of a horrific murder spree. She went to a cabin in the woods with her high school friends. There was drinking, there was drugs, there was sex, and a murderer came and murdered all her friends. She was the only one who got away by a complete stroke of luck. She has had to live with that ever since. After she was rescued by a cop coup and she was given some space to heal, the newspapers swarmed her and everybody wanted to interview her, and they called her a final girl. There are 2 other final girls in this reality, and they both suffered traumatic spree killings as well. Both inexplicably survived. One of the final girls has gone AWOL, and the other final girl wants to meet Quincy, wants to help her, and embraces the idea of being a final girl. Quincy doesn't want to embrace this. She wants to take some Valium, she wants to do her baking, and she wants to forget that this traumatic thing ever happened. Partly, it's easier for Quincy to forget the traumatic event because she has amnesia about the actual event itself. So she can't recall the killer or her friends being murdered. She can only recall the beginning when she knew something was wrong and the end when she was rescued by the cop. This makes it easier for Quincy to melt away into her life, but she is left with so much trauma and so much PTSD from this that although she tries to hide it, she can never really escape it. When the final girl she's been in contact with, Lisa, is found dead by suicide, Quincy doesn't know what to feel about it. And when the third final girl, Samantha Boyd, who has been AWOL for years, turns up on her doorstep, she really doesn't know what to do next. So this story is about Quincy recovering her memories, finding out what it takes to be a final girl, finding out the deep level of trauma that she has had to face and live with, and what scars that has left, besides the scars of the stabbings that she endured. This is a very typical, fun, slasher, thriller, horror book. It follows so many of the traditional horror tropes, and obviously The Final Girls is a reference to horror movies. I liked this book just fine. It's like 350 pages. I read it in just a few days. It's very quick. It's very compelling. And I think I see why people like Riley Sager as a writer, because he writes in a very fluid, fast, easy, well-paced way. So at no point was I like, oh, this is really dragging, or was I like, this is taking too long. I lost interest in the story that was happening. But also at no point was I overly surprised, was I thrilled. I will say I was definitely creeped out at some points, and I did stop reading this book at night and just started reading it only during the day. But it's also just like the gore factor and, you know, the suspense factor. I just didn't want to have nightmares, so I didn't want to read it at night. But I also see the critiques of Riley Sager in that he definitely tries, and his pseudonym implies that he tries to write like a woman and tries to appeal to women while not really understanding a woman's reaction to things. There were many, many aspects of this book that would never have happened. A woman would never have let happen. They would have never done those things. And also, and especially, a final girl would never have done those things. They would never have put themselves in some of the positions that these characters found themselves in. And I think that that is a limitation of a man writing for a woman, because men do not understand the constant fear and vigilance that women need to portray in every minute of their day, especially obviously women of color and trans women and non-binary women. I definitely liked this. I enjoyed it. There was no point where I thought this is stupid, this is dumb, this is bad, but there was also no point in this book where I thought, oh, this is amazing, I can't wait to read more Riley Sager. I would read more Riley Sager. I would read another of his books. I have the feeling, and I've heard from others, that they are going to be all basically the same. So it's just the degree of how much you like the reveals, how much you like the plot twists, how much you like the characters. I thought this was fine. I like that the story gives you enough that you could suspect very many people. It could be this one, it could be this one. According to the tropes, it could be this, it could be that. And you kind of suspect everybody, but like at the heart, you kind of also knew what was going to happen. Like some of the big reveals were like not thrilling, but that's okay. Like it was still fine, fun, enjoyable. And that was the 10th and final book that I read in July. So I read a lot of thrillers in July. So many more, actually, than I was planning on reading. I read many thrillers. Some of them were contemporary booktube darlings, like Lisa Foley and Riley Sager. One was a eco-thriller slash sci-fi slash fantasy, which I really enjoyed and I read on audio. And one was more of a literary fiction. The Silent Companions might have been the creepiest thriller that I read. Some of them had sci-fi supernatural aspects. Some of them were just murderers. I liked all of them. It was nice to get back to reading some thrillers and some mysteries. I also read my first Mary Roberts Rinehart. I love thrillers, I love mysteries, and at the heart to me, thrillers are mysteries. I've never really read a thriller that doesn't have a mystery element, and certainly the ones that I read here had heavy mystery elements, but a true mystery is always my favorite. I read my TBRTackle for July, which was also on my 20 books. I found out in 2020 that I want to read in 2021, so I read this in 2022. I read a booktube darling, All Systems Red, that I've been wanting to read forever by Martha Wells, and I didn't love it as much as I thought I would, but I did enjoy it. I read the Subtweet by Vivek, Shaya, trans author, so I did have some non-binary trans rep in there. There was a little bit of queer rep in Devolution and The Hunting Party. Didn't read a lot of books by people of color. Vivek Shaya and Tochi Onyebuchi are two of the only ones that I read, but overall I had a really enjoyable reading month. It was maybe not as diverse as usual, either in genre or in author, but it still felt pretty balanced and pretty fun for me. It wasn't a huge reading month as far as how many books I read. I do think I got out of my reading slump that I was in the end of June. Let me know if you've read any of these books that I've shown here. Let me know your favorite Riley Sager book if you have one, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much. Bye. This book feels like walking out on the lawn at night when the grass is wet. It feels like the shakes and rattles of an old house. And it feels like needing to fix a problem that you don't want to be involved in. The Hunting Party felt like being so cold you can see your breath, the sting of icy cold water, the smell of blood. This book felt like a sunburn. It felt like laying by the pool and trying to relax but not being entirely relaxed and being covered in goo.